Hello and good afternoon. Thank you all for joining us on eGroup's monthly webinar series. Today we're joined by Sophos and we'll be discussing their security platform features specifically tailored towards combating ransomware. For those of you new to the monthly series, we are eGroup, a comprehensive IT solutions provider. We've been in business since 1999. Our focus is delivering speed and certainty to the data center and cloud. To be able to deliver these results, it's important to find great technology such as Sophos to partner with to help our customers achieve the level of success necessary that make them competitive in their respective sector. Before we get started, I do want to let you know if you have questions throughout the webinar, feel free to drop them in the chat box below and we'll answer them at the end of the webinar series. We're happy to be joined today by Leslie Lorenko and TJ Iacobone from Sophos. Leslie is the channel account executive at Sophos and has been with the company for 3.5 years. TJ is a senior solutions architect at Sophos and has been with the company since 2001. So he is well ingrained with the Sophos technology. At this time, I'm going to turn the power over to Leslie and TJ. Take it away, guys.
Hey everyone, we want to thank eGroup as one of our gold partners here in the Charleston area for taking the time to allow us to show you guys how we stop ransomware. I'm actually going to mostly let TJ chat away. We're going to focus on the threat landscape as a whole and talk to you about what's happened in the last couple of years. I'm sure everyone knows though when you start hearing about Wannacry and Pecha. And then TJ is actually going to show you a hacking demonstration where he attacks a system that is vulnerable through a couple of very simple ways that you can actually Google yourself and watch YouTube videos to do. It looks pretty complicated, but it's really not. I mean, most people's kids nowadays are doing this sort of thing. And then he's going to actually show you what happens when you try the same type of techniques on a Sophos protected endpoint. So TJ, I will turn it over to you and let you kick everything off.
Great, thanks, Leslie. So what I'm going to do is go through the presentation real quick. We'll talk about the landscape, as Leslie mentioned, and we'll jump right into that live demonstration. As mentioned at the beginning, I've been with Sophos for 17 years, and a lot has changed since I first started here. Here's a basic breakdown of what we're currently seeing. Years ago, the primary form of attacks was what we'd call generic malware, and today it only makes up about 12% of the attack vectors. This category is what really is covered by traditional antivirus, right? So if you have basic antivirus deployed, great. You're all set against about 12% of the malware that's coming after you right now. As you look at the other 88%, however, we see ransomware and what we call advanced malware on the rise. Surprisingly, 54% of organizations in 2017 were hit by ransomware, and on average, they were hit twice. It's really no fun to be hit by ransomware. Obviously, there's a lot of added cost between trying to get the key back and recovering your data and everything else. And getting hit twice simply is just adding insult to injury. Advanced malware includes zero-day multi-stage attacks, and this category has really grown exponentially over the past year. Between attacks like Wannacry and Pecha, which are really advanced malware that just happen to have a ransomware payload on top of it. And of course, there's email and web-based malware also on the rise. And crucially, what our industry calls exploits are becoming more and more prevalent across many of these categories, especially among the top 4 categories you see on this chart. Exploiting vulnerabilities is one of the fastest growing tactics among the cyber criminals, and one of the primary reasons so many organizations turn to Sophos' InterceptX to provide protection. InterceptX is particularly effective against stopping all forms of ransomware and exploit-based attacks. So we can handle that big bulk that you see in there. Now, to round out that chart, about 8% of the threat we see is coming from cryptocurrency mining. Originally, cryptocurrency started off really as a way to kind of circumvent the national monetary system and go as something that's completely distributed and handled throughout the globe, irrespective of borders. And so we used to always track these crypto miners as a potentially unwanted application. However, what we're now seeing is attackers utilizing the mining system to utilize your CPU power and CPU cycles to mine for those currencies on their behalf, which can obviously bring your system to its knees because it does take up a lot of horsepower to mine those coins. Because of the prevalence of this and the rise of that, we're no longer categorizing those apps as potentially unwanted. We're actually treating them as malware. So we will block them right out of the gate because of the fact that we're seeing more and more of this being utilized by attackers for their own gain against yours. And then finally, we're also seeing privilege escalation on the rise as more and more hackers are trying to steal credentials to gain privileged access to other areas of the network and other data that you may be storing. So with how the threats have evolved, that's why we created Intercept X. And the newest version of Intercept X that we just introduced about 8 weeks ago addresses those threats specifically. It's relatively easy for a cybersecurity product to protect against threats from yesterday. But what we need is absolutely technology that's going to protect against the threats from tomorrow, or that could potentially come tomorrow. Now, we decided to do a bit of a study. We actually commissioned a statistical firm to go out and run a survey and find out what people are actually seeing in the world as just a general proposition. And that survey company went and queried 2,700 or so people and found out that out of those 2,700 people that they talked to, 54% were hit by ransomware in the last year, and that they were hit on average 2 times for ransomware within that time period. Now, out of that, we got some additional information out of them, right? So we decided to find out, well, were you up to date with your endpoint product at that time? Now, some of those people decided to not answer, but out of the ones that did, 77% of them were running up-to-date anti-malware protection. 21% were not up to date and they knew it. The most terrifying part is the 1% that said that they actually had no idea. And from a security perspective, having a black hole is the scariest situation to be caught in, to not be able to know what your current security stance is. And to me, out of this list, that 1% is the most troubling one to see. The upside is that it was only 1% out of those that responded. So that is definitely heartening. It could have been worse. Now, a couple of quick facts based off of that information that we had. It's a big, big business. Now, ransomware only makes up part of the malware threat. If you were to look at malware as an overall whole, between Trojans, spyware, ransomware, data theft, and so forth, that ransomware market, if it was treated as an individual organization, would actually rank 37th on the Fortune 100. They were responsible for generating roughly $70-something billion in revenue, right? Which is actually just two spaces behind Target, and a couple of spaces ahead of several other organizations that are well known that I unfortunately don't want to bring up. But it is big business. Why? When you look at strictly just the ransomware from the respondents that we had, out of those 1,400 or so people that did respond that they did actually have ransomware, they paid out an average of $2,500 per incident. Given that each of them had 2 incidences, you do the math, it comes up to roughly $3 million just for that one small subset. And that was the cost of actually paying for the ransomware in order to get their key back. All the work in order to restore the key, the time cost, the soft cost with the employees doing all the work to restore the environment, ultimately comes out to roughly $133,000 based on the average of 100 to 5,000 seat type of environments. Now, on top of that, only about 30% of those people, about 70% of those people got their keys back. 30% did not. So they had to absolutely rely on their backups, even though they paid the penalty in the ransom to the ransomware writers. 72% of the victims were unable to access their data for several days, and 58% cite users as the original source. So even though we focus on the end user, almost half is still going to come through other vulnerabilities, direct attacks against the network, as opposed to the individual user being the one that triggered the event. Now, ransomware is not simply just an individual item. When we talk about advanced threats, a lot of times we see them bundled together. And the attack in 2007 between Wannacry and Pecha, they were particularly devastating because they spread quickly and efficiently across corporate networks by utilizing an exploit in Microsoft Windows. This vulnerability is originally thought to have been developed by the NSA, who originally used it for their own purposes rather than disclosing it to Microsoft, so it could be patched. But of course, once that information got out during that leak last year, it was utilized by the ransomware writers almost immediately because Microsoft attempted to patch it as quickly as possible. And so you have a gap between when the patch is developed, when it gets rolled out, and when you're protected. And so if we can get in between that gap as an attacker, then you're going to make more money. So they're going to focus on trying to get that rolled out as quickly as possible and spread as quickly as they can before it gets patched. But even once the patch comes out, Microsoft did a very good job of getting that patch developed and rolled out quickly. We all know it takes even longer to make sure that it gets out to your last system inside of your environment. Excuse me. And so because of that, and the fact that it does take time to get that patch rolled out, the malware spread so quickly that it was able to actually get to roughly 230,000 computers in over 150 countries in less than 24 hours. Now, just over a month later, a new strain of ransomware inflicted similar damage, but in a very different way. A variant of the Pecha family of ransomware exploited a more fundamental way in which we update and patch systems. Instead of attacking the system itself, it actually affected the software that was responsible for keeping the system up to date. So where Wanna exploited an unpatched system, Pecha took over the actual patch update process or software update process itself. Hackers were able to take advantage of a backdoor vulnerability in the software update process for a popular Russian accounting application called me.doc, and was able to distribute the ransomware through a regular software update. Unfortunately, the flaws that Pecha's hackers took advantage of are remarkably common, and software updates are like serving up vulnerabilities on a silver platter for hackers, as they usually run with elevated privileges. Now, it isn't just simply executable code that presents the problem, right? Instructing your users not to click on EXEs, blocking their ability to run install files and so forth is absolutely critical, but that only is going to cover about 74% of the threat. We see that roughly about 26% of breaches start from a weaponized Office document. Now, a couple of quick ransomware facts. 1 in 5. Now, that actually is the number of SMB companies that were hit with ransomware and ended up having to close their doors immediately because they could not afford the downtime and they could not afford the cost of the ransomware. So 20% of the SMB market that was hit by ransomware is no longer in business. 60% in 6. What this is within 6 months, 60% of those same SMB companies that were hit with ransomware end up going out of business. So 20% immediately end up going out of business, and then 60% within 6 months. So by the end of a year, only about 40% of those businesses that were hit by ransomware are still intact and in business. And you can see these articles on cnet.com and inc.com if you want to follow up with them. Now, how hard is it really to create ransomware, right? You got to be able to program it first, right? Figure out how your encryption method's going to work, package it all up, get your payment network sorted out. And if you're not a monster, figure out how you're going to deliver the decryption tools to the people who pay the ransom, all without being caught. And as we can see here, there's just a small sample of the ones that have happened in the last year, 2 years, 3 years. Crypto wall and crisis going back about 4 years at this point. Pecha and Wannacry obviously last year, sprinkled in through there, Crypto Locker and Locky and HydroCrypt, all of which were very effective at causing harm and generating revenue. So how difficult is it to do all of that? Well, if you really want to change careers and jump on the other side of the fence, it's actually not that hard. Oop, I lost my presentation because it just crashed. Let's just open that back up. So if you have no technical skill, no programming capabilities, and you do want to jump on the other side of the fence, it's not a problem. There's a service for that. You can actually go over to the Satan website. Obviously, they're only available through the Tor and the Onion network because they are hidden a little bit on the deep web, but it doesn't take much. All you have to do is set up an account. You can sign in, create your account, build custom malware that's unique to you, and download it all within about 60 seconds. All right, the only thing that's going to slow you down is the CAPTCHA. Once you pass that CAPTCHA and get logged in, it's very simple. There isn't much more that you need to do. It'll build you the ransomware. All you got to do is distribute it. They'll send me an executable that I can then send out via email. And I could even leave it as ransomware.exe because, well, who's really going to suspect that an executable named ransomware.exe is actually ransomware, right? A few people will actually run it. And whoever's behind Satan does all the work for me. They collect the ransom, they keep 30% and give me 70% because I was the one that spread it, much like a distribution system. Now, interestingly enough, that 70% that I get is actually the exact same model that the iTunes App Store utilizes. Apple keeps 30% of the profits and the developer gets 70. Way too simple. All right, so how do you actually combat this? Well, that's what we're going to show you in just a minute. What we're going to do is we're going to show you how InterceptX will block the ability for ransomware to get started on the system, encrypt files, and we'll actually be able to roll them back and restore them to their original state. So what I'm going to do now is we'll go ahead and we'll close out of this presentation and we'll actually jump into my demo environment here. Now, what I've got inside this demo environment, as you can see, it is running inside of VMware Fusion. I actually have a small mini network set up. I've got a Sophos internet gateway configured as my connection to the internet. I have a domain controller. I actually have a Windows 7 workstation running Windows 7 Enterprise, as you can see here. And I have what is known as Kali Linux. Now, Kali Linux is a prepackaged, free for use exploit platform. It is predominantly designed for penetration testers to have all the tools in one place, be able to test the security of a network. You contact the pen tester, say, hey, I want you to see how vulnerable I am, show me where my weaknesses are so that I can address them. Well, the reality is that it's a very effective tool, even for the bad guys. All right. So what we have inside of Kali Linux is a system called Metasploit. This was built by a company called Rapid7, and they keep it up to date. And so basically, it's a prepackaged attack platform. What I'm going to do is show you what it looks like when somebody is trying to attack an environment. Now, what we're going to focus on is creating what is called a code cave. We're going to take a legitimate piece of software. We're going to hollow out a cave inside this existing software and put our payload in it. Right? This way, I can convince somebody to run the application, and when they do run it, it appears to be the application itself. So if I code cave, let's say, an international clock program, that would give me all the clocks across the globe, much like the old school newsrooms back in the 1970s, where they had the clocks for Tokyo and Hong Kong and London and Paris across the back wall. You could have that nice little experience inside your workstation. We're going to actually take that type of app and we're going to inject in it a reverse tunnel that'll connect back to my Kali system here, allowing me to gain access to it. I'm then going to actually take a document and I'm going to host it on a website that the user will access, download the document, and then get hit by ransomware. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start up my Metasploit server. And this is where I will actually build my back end. This is where I'm going to define the actual reverse tunnel that the client is going to connect back to. So here, what I'm going to do is, excuse me, create my tunnel environment. And I'm going to define this one as a reverse HTTPS tunnel, so that the client will connect over port 443, which is going to generally always be allowed by that system's firewall. Okay, now I'm simply going to specify that the system's going to listen on every possible IP and accept connections from any IP that connects to it. I don't want to limit it because the client could be on, excuse me, on any IP address. I don't necessarily know what it might be. And of course, now I'm going to specify the correct port. And then I'm going to make sure that the session doesn't close out as soon as it started. And if I could actually spell the word false, I'd be awesome. There we go. And now I'm going to set this up so that it actually runs the listener and just sits there waiting for a connection to come in. Okay, so now it's going to wait for whatever poor sod that I get the system to actually run on to connect back. Now what I need to do is actually create my code caved program. And for that, I'm going to use a utility called Shelter. Okay, now Shelter is, again, a freely available tool. You can go and check this out. It's actually a native Windows system, but inside of this Linux environment, I'm using Wine to do that, so I don't have to run multiple systems in order to do it. And it works just well. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to point it to the application that I got on this website that I'm hosting, that I'm going to inject the code into. Oops, I got the path wrong. Let me double check my path name. That's right. There we go. Okay, and so it's taking a back of it, but I already have a backup of that file, so it's just telling me that, hey, I've already got a copy, I'm not making another one. And now it's going to scan through all of the instructions inside of this program, trying to find an open space that it can inject my attack inside of. That way, when the user runs the program, as far as they know, the program works just normally the way it should. Okay. And that generally takes about 45, 50 seconds or so. It's already found it, so we're good to go here. Stealth mode just means, do I want to be able to add stuff in down the road if I want to add something? Now I'm going to pick the particular attack type that I want to put into it. And as I mentioned earlier, we're going to do an HTTPS reverse session. So simply just select that from the list. Where is it going to be communicating with? And of course, I want it to point back to my main system here. And because I'm on an internal network, I'm simply just going to put in the IP address for the server. I could put in a domain name, which would generally be the way to do it. But because we're on this internal private network, I'm just putting in the IP. And of course, I'm going to set this for HTTPS port 443. Now it goes ahead and sticks the information in there, and it does some stuff to hide it. You'll notice in here that it says polymorphic. All right, that way it can actually hide itself so that when a traditional security product goes to look at it, it won't be able to see the actual payload. All right, so it's hiding it nicely for me. All right, and that's it. I now have a payload that I've got embedded in a website. Okay. Now I'm going to go over to my workstation and I'm going to go to that website. Now, this particular workstation is not running Sophos. This is actually a standard Windows 7 system that's up to date with all of its latest security patches. And it is running a product called Immunet. I try not to pick on or utilize other vendors' products for a licensing standpoint and whatnot. So this is a freeware product called Immunet. Technically, it started off as life as ClamAV. Cisco bought the ClamAV rights and whatnot and created this product called Immunet. And it kind of has a little bit of a relationship to Cisco AMP, but not quite. So it's a little bit different, but it is freeware. So I don't have to worry about licensing on that front. And what I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to visit that website. Okay, so here's the website that the user goes ahead and visits, right? So I've compromised some website on the back end. That's a whole nother story. For now, I simply just take my app that I've stuck that payload into inside that cave, and I put it up on the website. So now when the user comes to the web page and they click on get the travel app, they're going to get my code caved copy of that world clock program. I'll go ahead and download that file. It's not very big. It's on the local network, so it's going to download pretty quick. And I got an older copy here. I'm going to get rid of that. Right. And so I'm going to go ahead and run this installer. So keep an eye on the back over here on this little terminal window. What you're going to see is a connection come in and connect, giving me back-end access to the system. And we'll see not a peep from either the operating system or from the protection that's already on here. Okay. So we'll go ahead and we'll launch that. And of course, Windows tries to tell me, I want to be safe. We downloaded this file from the internet. Are you sure? And of course, like an end user, I say, sure, go ahead and run. And you notice as soon as the app starts, the connection is already created, right? So it's already there. I don't even have to finish this installer. It's already going, right? Now, as the attacker, what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump into that session because it'll only stay open as long as that app is running. If I close this app out, then it'll close the session. So as the attacker, what I want to do now is I want to switch to another running app on that system. And so I'm going to try to migrate to another system. So what I'm going to do is migrate. In this case, I'll probably end up migrating to a Windows, a Notepad program. So I hit migrate. And it says I wasn't in the right session, so it helps if you actually change to the correct session. Now let's try that again. All right, so now it migrated. In this case, like I said, it did migrate to Notepad. So even if I finish this out, complete my install, and the install completes and it finishes, right? I don't have to worry about this program closing out because I will retain my back-end access. Now, this program is going to tell me I need to reboot. So before that system reboots, what I want to do is I want to get some persistence in here. So now what I'm going to do is I already have a script that's built that's going to upload yet another program to the system to get in on the back end. What it's actually going to do is write a program to the system startup folder. So if we take a look in startup, we see that it's empty right now. What we're going to do here is we're going to run this script that's going to copy a program that actually is putty underneath the hood. You'll actually see it in the icon, but I've got it renamed to say winservice.exe. So when the user looks inside of the task manager, it doesn't look like it's out of place. And it runs in the background so they don't even see it. Okay, so now what it's going to do is it's now going to copy the files. You can see it's taking putty 32shns.exe and moving it to the startup program winservice.exe. So you can see the files now uploaded. And if I take a look inside of there, you can see it says winservice.exe, right? Now, this isn't a perfect science. It looks to me like it's not quite complete. You'll notice that the icon isn't quite right. So every time I see that happen, every once in a while I see that happen, it usually is an indication to me that the file wasn't completely copied over. So there's my program, my clock, right? It's all going on that system. I can go ahead and close all that. We'll simply just go and say continue there. We can close any of those and so forth. Let's double check here. See if we got it. Doesn't look like it's there. What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to delete that really quick. And we'll try it again. All right, we'll see if that took this time. And so what we're going to do now is we're actually going to kick that system and cause it to reboot to see if we actually did get the persistence that we want. So what ended up happening here in that situation is I did lose my connection before I was able to force it to reboot, right? So I actually don't have a session anymore because the program did close, right? So you can see the interpreter session is closed, the user exited out of the program. So what we're going to do is we're going to reboot this guy and we'll see where we end up. And I'm going to restart my back-end session for the tunnel. Okay, so I got my listener back up and we'll see if my persistence did take or not. And so when I log in, it's going to run that startup executable. And you can see it was trying to run back there, but I think we got a damaged copy of it. And if we take a look inside of the task manager here, we will not see that that Win service was actually running. So it was probably broken somewhat, and that does happen. This, like I said, is not a perfect system, as most times when you try to inject code into an actual application, it doesn't always work. So what I'm just going to do is we'll kind of skip ahead real quick and show you what happens if you did have persistence. We'll simply just launch that executable again to actually open that tunnel one last time. Okay, so we have our session there. If we actually had it run in the back end, I could now still do all of the things that I could if I really wanted to. And from here, I could even get shell access. So let's see what they have in their downloads folder. Right, there's all those files. We could take a look around, see what else that they've got. Right. From here, we can get back out. We can get into Meterpreter land and run any of these commands. One of which is, you know what? Let's see if we can't get our hands on system level access. Right. So if we take a look at who I currently am right now, I'm currently logged in as the user Sophos, right? Because that's who's currently logged in inside that environment. That's what I got access. What I'm going to try to do now is get system level access. And it looks like I did. So now that I have system level access, I could go ahead and, let's say, I don't know, get the user account credential information. So we're going to go ahead and steal the SAM file, which is the security account manager, where usernames and passwords are stored in a hash. And there we go. So not only do we have the user Sophos, we've got the guest user, and lo and behold, we have an administrator user. Now we could use these credentials to authenticate against that specific system utilizing what's known as a pass the hash mechanism. But let's see if maybe they used a password that's a well-known password. So I'm going to go ahead and grab this right here. And this is a lesson for everybody to make sure that they always use a good quality secured password for everything that they do. I highly personally recommend a password manager like LastPass. Makes it easy to create effective passwords, because the reason why is if you use the same password over and over again and the website that you used it on ends up being compromised, that password is going to find its way here into a website known as crackstation.net. Now what crackstation.net does is they take passwords from these password dumps of these compromised websites, generates the hash for each one of those passwords, and then hangs on to the hash as an indexable database. So if I go ahead and I stick that hash in here and say, yep, I'm not a robot and it's looking for traffic lights, so we'll go ahead and we'll do that. And now I'm going to have it crack the hash. And what we find is that this administrator did not use a very good password. So now we have the password as plain text that we can now use to log into any system that this administrative user had been using elsewhere. So if that administrator happened to use the same password for their CRM system, their patient record system, their purchase ordering and finance system, their financial website, simply just banking, I could now log in and authenticate as that specific user. Right? I could do the same thing for any of the other hashes that are in here. Right? Now, all of this was predicated on me getting them to launch some code. All right? Now, this is an active adversary type of situation. This is where me as the attacker is trying to gain my way into an environment and continue to spread wherever I can. right? So I got one little foothold with that world clock application. And then from there, I spread out by looking at additional credentials. I could look at additional files on their system. I could upload persistence like I tried to do. Unfortunately, in this case, it didn't work, but there are other fish in the sea that I can go after, right? Now let's see what happens if I decided to be a little bit more malicious. And here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to launch a piece of ransomware, right? Now, this is again embedded on that same website. So if I go back to Kali here, on this same website, I happen to have a Word document that has a payload built into it that's specifically going to run ransomware. Now, I have a collection of files here. So we can see all those files. They're simply just perfectly normal, readable files. There isn't anything special about them. They're simply just dummy files for us to play with. And so if we open one of these up, we'll see that it just has some basic, simple content in it, right? Couple of characters, just enough to populate the file. But as you can see, it is perfectly readable. What's going to happen now is I'm going to get my hands on this ransomware document. Ah, look at that. It looks like we have a final update notification from our Immunet. We'll see if it'll actually stop it, however. So we'll go ahead and we'll save the file here. And it looks like we're finally getting some protection out of our product here, which is good, obviously, but it has recently updated. So they finally caught up. I've been doing this presentation for about 4 weeks. So it looks like I need to update my file. But just so you can see what it's ultimately doing, I'm going to show you how this actually works. So I'm going to go ahead and turn off the real-time protection at this point. Because this is looking at it pre-execution, meaning that it recognized it as being a piece of malware beforehand, right? Which means it's a known entity. If I were to recode this, which would take me about another hour, and we obviously don't have enough time for that, I could create a brand new instance of this that it would not be able to detect. So I'm going to open up this document here. Let me re-download it. Didn't turn it off just enough yet. There we go. Okay, so now we have a copy of it. And of course, when an attacker tries to get you to run code, they want to try to be as helpful as possible, right? So of course, this document coming from the web could be potentially dangerous. And of course, Microsoft's going to tell you that. And so what we're going to do is ignore that because, well, they tell us, in order to be able to open this, we need to hit the enable button. So we click on options here. We say, yep, go ahead and enable that content. Say okay, and now it's going to run and encrypt the files on my system. If I take a look back in my desktop folder here, we can see all those files now have an EZZ file extension. They're no longer the correct extension. If I try to open this file up, all I'm going to find is garbled, junky, useless information. All right. Now, the upside is that when your anti-malware protection is able to identify it right out of the gate and prevent it from running to start, you get the protection. However, if it's not able to do that, it would ultimately run and do this. What I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to flip over and reset my system so that it's running Sophos, and we're actually going to turn off some of the Sophos functions so that it doesn't identify it proactively. It's going to identify it specifically on the ransomware side of things. If we take a look at the settings here, what we turned off on this one was the real-time scanning, right? So look for a program install, program start, look for the blocking mode, right? Is it going to block or not? Then we turned off the cloud detection engines, which is, does the cloud know anything about it specifically? And then the AV stuff. So there wasn't anything in here that specifically deals with ransomware. It's looking at it pre-execution, right? Now, what I'm going to do is, like I said, I'm going to flip this over. To a system that has Sophos on it. Now I'm going to restart my session here. And we'll see how Sophos does against the Code Cave program that allowed us to get access, that same world clock setup program that we were looking at earlier. And then we're going to see how it handles that ransomware. All right, so we have our session open there. Now we're on this system that has Sophos installed on it. You can see there. And what we're going to do is we're going to try to gain access to that file again, right? Okay, so there's my website, and I'm going to pull down that app. And you can see immediately we get blocked access to it, right? Now that's the wrong file. Let's try this again. We'll get the travel app instead. All right, so now we're trying to pull down that setup world clock. We'll go ahead and save the file. Now the thing about a code cave is it's not something that you see until you run the software, right? That other app, that Get New app that I had, was a totally different application. So we got the travel app now, the world clock. And here we have it in our downloads. And remember when we launched it last time, it made an immediate connection to my terminals, my Kali Linux server. So now when I go to launch this guy, again, Windows gives me that notification. We haven't executed it just yet. We hit run, and immediately we see the code cave, all right? No connection is generated, right? And that's one of those exploit types that we were talking about earlier in the presentation, okay? Now that we've got that, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to disable my exploit protection, and we're going to go for pulling down that Word document and show the protection that we have against unknown ransomware, right? Because the way that ransomware that I have in this document is running is through an actual exploit, which is the reason why the Immunet finally caught it, because it finally got updated to recognize that exploit. But what we're going to have here in this situation is I'm actually going to turn off my exploit protection altogether. And again, here are all those same files that we had before, all those images and spreadsheets. All right, there's all my Excel spreadsheets and whatnot. So they're all the exact same files that were on the other system. This one's simply just running Sophos, right? And we see that the exploit protection has been disabled. And now we're going to go ahead and download that document. And we'll go ahead and save the file. So I basically turned off the same type of protection that we had in the Immunet product. Now we go ahead and we launch this. What we're going to see is that instead of detecting it beforehand, the CryptoGuard is going to provide protection post-execution. In a simple sentence, what CryptoGuard does is provide real-time, on-the-fly backup and restore of files based off of a ransomware event. What's really happening under the hood in the long form is that CryptoGuard is monitoring all processes for edits. Unknown processes it gets involved in. So if it recognizes an unknown process trying to edit a file, the CryptoGuard functionality from Sophos jumps in, creates a snapshot of the files that the unknown process is trying to edit before it's edited. Then after it has its snapshot, it lets the process do whatever it's going to do. In this case, its ransomware is going to encrypt the file. Once it's done encrypting the file, it's going to save those changes. CryptoGuard will jump back in now that the changes are complete and compare the changed file versus the original snapshot, at which point it becomes very obvious that the changed file is encrypted. Therefore, we had an unknown process encrypting a bunch of files. That's enough for us to say that it's ransomware. We then lock that down, excuse me, and then we restore the file back to its original state from those snapshots. Okay, so when I go ahead and hit the enable the macro on here, we're going to see that some of those files actually do get encrypted. But I have the system set up so that it doesn't simply just remove all the encrypted files. It'll actually retain them so that we can verify. So if you take a look, all the timestamps on these guys, February 16th of last year. If I sort based off of the name, we'll see that again, those Excel spreadsheets, just February 16th of last year. What we're going to see is we're going to actually get a couple of files that end up with that EZZ extension where they are ultimately encrypted. So if we again open this up, Excel opens up, we see that basic text in there, right? Fully readable and whatnot. We go ahead and we launch this. And now it's trying to launch its malicious code to encrypt the files, and we get the notification from Sophos endpoint that ransomware was detected in that embedded macro. But if we take a look at our files over here, we see it did get through some of those files, right? The way that ransomware was written was to look and enumerate for the files in order. So 1, then 10, and then 100. It's farther down here, right? And then it would go through and then do 2, and then 3, and then 4, then 5, then 9, and so forth. But we stopped it after only 3, right? So here we have those files that we would have gotten if we didn't have CryptoGuard, which, as we can see, is simply just encrypted garbage, didn't do anything that we're able to utilize. We have to pay the money to recover the file. But at the same time, we still have our original file that we didn't lose. All right, so there's that encrypted garbled junk. And then here's our original file that is still fully readable and intact. Now, the system on the back end is going through and going to be cleaning up the rest of the process and removing stuff from the system. So in about 4 or 5 minutes, we'll get a notification that the malicious behavior has been cleaned, and we'll get a no threat notification. This will go back to being green. Everything is okay. But we are in a Sophos universe here, which means that if we attempt to go to a website that while we are currently unhealthy, we will actually get blocked. It's one of the functions of our Sophos security gateway. That allows us to enforce our policy on those systems based off of the health of the workstation. So in this case, the workstation is not currently healthy, which means that we'll be able to take that into account when we apply policy. And be able to prevent people from having access to other servers, other websites, whatever the case may be with regards to the policy. And in this particular case here, you can see we have that unhealthy system listed. And we can take that into account with regards to the health status. So you can see here, HB stands for heartbeat, which means that we are looking for the health of the system, which has a requirement for a minimum of a yellow health status. We are currently red because we are entirely unhealthy. So you can see here we have a yellow requirement. If I try to go to any website that's not internal, that Kali Linux is technically internal. So if I try to go to, say, Google, we'll see I'm not able to get there. And we'll get a notice that access is blocked. And so that's the synergy between our gateway and our endpoint products. Now, obviously, predominantly we're talking about ransomware specifically. This is simply just an add-on on top of that. But now you can see it says no threats found. We've actually been cleaned up. If we take a look at our status, we see that we're green. Now that we're healthy, we can actually go and travel around the internet as we were able to before. Right. Now, that's what we wanted to kind of go over today and talk about as far as a ransomware, show you how things can play out, how we can provide better protection against those threats, and be able to allow you to retain your data as much as possible.
Fantastic. Thank you for taking the time to demo through that, TJ. At this time, if anyone has any questions, comments, concerns, feel free to write them in the chat boxes. We're happy to do that. Or you could certainly reach out to your local eGroup rep, and they can set up some time with TJ and I one-on-one, and we can get you a trial of Intercept and let you get your hands on trying some of the things that TJ showed today as well.
Great. Thank you, Leslie, and thank you, TJ, both for jumping on our monthly series here in June and talking through some ransomware tactics and ways to combat that. We really appreciate the partnership. And yeah, I will follow up with everyone with the recording of this webinar for you guys to share around with your team. Feel free to let us know if you have any questions. You can just respond back to that email I send out, and I'll be happy to get you in touch with the right eGroup and Sophos representative to help answer any questions you have around the technology. Just want to thank you again for your support and for your time today, and we look forward to speaking with you in the future. Hope you have a great rest of your day. Thank you.